They say the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. For a long time, I believed that if you just worked hard enough, if your intentions were pure and your dedication unwavering, the light would always find you, shield you. I learned the hard way that sometimes the brightest lights are simply there to illuminate your downfall for a wider audience. It all happened with such breathtaking speed, yet the memory of it unspools in agonizing slow motion, even now. In less than 10 minutes, I wasn't just terminated, I was erased. Forced out under the indifferent, almost pitying stares of colleagues I'd once considered my professional family, my name dragged through the mud, my career left in smoldering ruins. And the man orchestrating it all, he just smiled. That damn placid smile. My name is Arthur Jenkins, and for 23 years, Sterling & Thorne Innovations was more than just my employer. It was my proving ground, my second home. I started in the mailroom, fresh-faced and brimming with textbook theories about ethical business and groundbreaking tech. I poured my life into that company, climbing the ranks, not by stepping on others, but by building them up alongside me. I believed in mentorship, in collaborative success. By my late 40s, I was head of research and development, overseeing projects that were set to redefine our industry, sustainable energy solutions, something I was immensely passionate about. We were on the cusp of a breakthrough with Project Albatross, a revolutionary battery technology that promised to be smaller, more powerful, and infinitely more eco-friendly than anything on the market. It was my brainchild, nurtured from a scribbled concept on a napkin to a near-viable prototype. The irony, the sheer, bitter irony, is that the architect of my demise was someone I'd personally vouched for, someone I'd mentored. Julian Vance. Julian was sharp, undeniably brilliant, with a hunger that I initially mistook for ambition. He joined my department as a junior analyst and quickly made a name for himself. He was a quick study, always asking the right questions, always eager to take on more responsibility. I saw a younger version of myself in him, or so I thought. I took him under my wing, shared insights, opened doors. When a senior project lead position opened up on the Albatross team directly under me, I championed Julian. I argued to the board, the future of Sterling & Thorne, how tragically right I was, in a way I could never have foreseen. The betrayal didn't come like a sudden thunderstorm. It was more like a creeping fog, subtle at first, easily dismissed. It started with whispers, little things. A vital research paper I'd authored, which was supposed to be circulated internally for peer review before a major conference, went missing from the secure server, only to reappear days later with minor, almost untraceable alterations to key data points, alterations that subtly skewed the projected efficiency of Albatross downwards. Then, crucial components for our prototype, sourced from a specialized supplier I'd spent months vetting, began arriving late or were incorrectly logged and temporarily misplaced, causing frustrating delays. Each incident was isolated, explainable on its own, a server glitch, a logistics hiccup, human error, standard corporate friction, or so I tried to convince myself. But there was a pattern, a subtle undercurrent of sabotage that seemed to follow Julian's increasingly prominent role in daily operations. He was always there, offering to fix the problems, to streamline the processes. He'd stay late, poring over the data, as he put it. His reports to the board, which he'd started co-presenting with me at my suggestion, another brilliant move on my part, began to subtly highlight these unforeseen challenges, while also positioning himself as the one tirelessly working to overcome them. He was playing a long game, I see now, painting himself as the diligent firefighter constantly battling blazes that I would later realize he himself had set. The inciting incident, the one that ripped the blindfold from my eyes and shoved me into the abyss, came during what should have been our moment of triumph. We were scheduled for a full-scale demonstration of the Albatross prototype to the board of directors and a consortium of potential investors. This was it, the culmination of 5 years of relentless work. The night before, I was in the lab with my core team running final diagnostics. Everything was perfect. The readings were exceeding our expectations. We were jubilant, on the verge of securing the company's future and our own. I left the lab around 2 a.m., exhausted but exhilarated. Julian had offered to stay to babysit the prototype and ensure all systems were nominal for the morning. "You get some rest, Arthur," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder with that earnest, disarming smile. "You've earned it. I'll make sure she's purring for the big show." The next morning, I walked into the presentation hall to a scene of controlled chaos. The board members looked grim. The investors were whispering, their faces etched with concern. My team members were pale, huddled around the prototype, which was dead. Utterly, completely inert. Julian stood beside it, a picture of strained composure, explaining in hushed, solemn tones to Mr. Sterling himself, our CEO, that there had been a catastrophic system failure overnight. He claimed he'd found it that way when he arrived, despite his earlier promise to stay. Before I could even process what was happening, Julian turned, his eyes finding mine with a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Feigned sympathy? No, it was colder. Triumph. He then addressed the room, his voice resonating with false regret. "It seems," he began, "that in his enthusiasm, Arthur may have pushed the prototype beyond its stable limits during last night's final unsupervised tests. The core matrix is fried. We have logs indicating multiple system overrides originating from his terminal, bypassing standard safety protocols." My blood ran cold. Unsupervised tests? System overrides from my terminal? It was a bald-faced lie. I opened my mouth to protest, to explain, but Mr. Sterling cut me off, his voice like ice. "Arthur, is this true? Did you access the system after the final sign-off?" "No, of course not," I stammered. "The system was perfect when I left. Julian, you were there. You said you'd..." Julian shook his head sadly. "Arthur, I left shortly after you. I trusted everything was stable. The logs are time-stamped, and they clearly show access from your unique ID long after I clocked out." He produced a tablet displaying fabricated logs that, in my dazed state, looked horrifyingly convincing. They showed my credentials accessing the core system at 3:17 a.m., initiating a series of high-voltage stress tests that were never part of our protocol, tests that would undoubtedly fry any electronic system. It was a meticulously crafted setup. In less than 10 minutes, as Julian laid out his evidence with practiced solemnity, my world imploded. The investors looked aghast. The board was furious. Mr. Sterling, a man I'd respected for 2 decades, looked at me with profound disappointment and barely concealed anger. "Arthur," he said, his voice heavy, "given this catastrophic lapse in judgment, this reckless endangerment of the company's most vital asset, we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." I stood there, speechless, the accusation hanging in the air like a toxic gas. My team, people I'd mentored, people who knew my work ethic, my integrity, stared at their shoes, at the walls, anywhere but at me. Fear is a powerful silencer. Julian, the architect of my ruin, gave me one last fleeting look, a chilling cocktail of pity and cold, hard victory. As 2 security guards, men I'd shared coffee with countless times, gently but firmly took my arms, I realized the game had been rigged from the start. I hadn't just lost my job, I'd lost my reputation, my life's work, all stolen by the protege I'd so foolishly trusted. The fight for Project Albatross was over for me, but the fight for my name, for the truth, was just beginning. I just didn't know it yet. All I felt then was the crushing weight of an injustice so profound it stole the very breath from my lungs. The days that followed were a blur of muted colors and sharp, jabbing pains. Not physical pain, but the kind that settles deep in your bones, a chilling ache of betrayal and loss that sleep offers no respite from. Sterling and Thorne, my professional home for over 2 decades, had excommunicated me with surgical precision. My access cards were deactivated before I even reached the parking lot. My corporate accounts, email, server access, all vaporized as if I'd never existed. The official story, carefully curated by Julian and the board, painted me as a reckless, arrogant scientist who, in a fit of hubris, had destroyed the company's flagship project. An internal memo, leaked accidentally, on purpose to industry blogs, solidified this narrative. My name, once associated with innovation and integrity, was now a cautionary tale. The silence from former colleagues was the loudest sound. These were people I'd shared countless lunches with, celebrated birthdays and promotions with, weathered corporate storms alongside. Now, my calls went to voicemail, my emails unanswered. A few, the braver or perhaps more compassionate ones, sent terse, sympathetic texts. "So sorry to hear, Arthur," or "hang in there." But no one dared to publicly question the official narrative. Julian, I heard through the grapevine, had consolidated his power quickly. He was now the acting head of R&D, the hero who had salvaged what he could from the wreckage of Project Albatross and was working tirelessly to get it back on track. The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. My apartment, once a comfortable haven, began to feel like a prison. The walls seemed to close in, each tick of the clock a reminder of my stolen future. Sleep was a battlefield where nightmares of the demonstration, of Julian's smug face, of Mr. Sterling's disappointed glare, replayed in an endless loop. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom sensation of those security guards' hands on my arms still lingering. Bitterness was a constant companion, a corrosive acid eating away at my spirit. There were days I didn't leave the apartment, didn't answer the phone, just sat there, replaying every interaction with Julian, every warning sign I'd dismissed, every pat on the back I'd so naively accepted. How could I have been so blind? The question haunted me. Was it arrogance, complacency, or had Julian simply been that masterful a manipulator? The financial strain began to mount. My severance package was minimal, contingent on a non-disclosure agreement, so restrictive I couldn't even publicly defend myself without risking legal action. Job prospects for a disgraced R&D head in his late 40s, especially with the cloud of Project Albatross hanging over him, were non-existent. Every polite rejection, every interview that never materialized, chipped away at my remaining confidence. I was adrift, isolated, watching the life I'd painstakingly built crumble into dust. There were dark moments where the thought of just giving up seemed like a seductive whisper. The weight of the injustice felt unbearable. But then, something would flicker within me, a stubborn ember of defiance. It often happened late at night, when the city was quiet and the ghosts of my past were at their loudest. I'd look at my old research notes, the ones I'd fortunately kept personal copies of, stacks of papers filled with equations, diagrams, and the raw, untainted data of Project Albatross in its purest form. This was my work, my truth, and Julian had stolen it, twisted it, used it to destroy me. The anger, initially a paralyzing force, began to morph into a cold, focused resolve. He wouldn't win. I wouldn't let him. While everyone assumed I'd fallen apart, and indeed a part of me had, another part was quietly, methodically beginning to fight back. I couldn't storm the gates of Sterling and Thorne. I had no allies, no resources, no platform. Julian and the company held all the cards. So I had to be smarter, more patient. My revenge, my vindication, wouldn't be a loud explosion. It would be a slow, deliberate dismantling of Julian's lies, brick by brick. My first instinct had been to try and hack back into Sterling and Thorne's servers to find the original, untampered logs from that fateful night. But I was no hacker, and the attempt would be clumsy, easily traced, and would only confirm their narrative of me being reckless and willing to break rules. No, I needed something else. I needed proof that was irrefutable, and ideally, proof that Julian himself would inadvertently provide. I started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline, every meeting, every email, every casual conversation with Julian over the past year. I cross-referenced my personal diaries, my old digital calendars, anything that could provide context. I realized Julian's sabotage hadn't been a sudden opportunistic strike. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign. Those missing research papers, the delayed components. He'd been laying the groundwork for months, subtly discrediting me, isolating me, positioning himself as the indispensable one. A crucial piece of the puzzle was the specific method of the prototype's destruction. The logs Julian presented showed high-voltage stress tests initiated from my terminal. But our prototype had multiple fail-safes, specifically designed to prevent such overloads unless deliberately and repeatedly bypassed through several layers of administrative commands. I knew those command sequences intimately. They were complex, designed to be. For Julian to frame me, he would have needed not just my login credentials, but also a deep understanding of those override protocols, an understanding he feigned ignorance of, but clearly possessed. And how did he get my credentials? I was obsessively careful with my passwords. Then I remembered, weeks before the demonstration, my primary workstation had suffered a sudden, inexplicable hard drive failure. Julian, ever the helpful protege, had insisted on taking it to the internal IT department himself to expedite the repair. He'd even provided me with a temporary replacement. He must have installed a keylogger then, or cloned my drive. It was so obvious in retrospect, my own trust weaponized against me. The most critical clue, however, came from an unexpected source. One evening, drowning my sorrows in cheap instant coffee and sifting through old industry news, I stumbled upon an announcement. A smaller, somewhat obscure tech company, Innovatech Dynamics, had just secured a significant round of funding for a revolutionary new battery technology. The lead scientist on their project, a Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a name I vaguely recalled. I did some digging. Hayes had briefly consulted for Sterling and Thorne nearly 3 years ago, specifically on energy storage solutions, long before Project Albatross had fully taken shape under that name. She'd left after a few months, citing creative differences with the then R&D leadership, which was, at the time, me. I remembered her being brilliant, but her proposed theoretical models were, back then, too radical, too costly for us to pursue. On a hunch, I searched for Innovatch's published preliminary specs. My heart began to pound. Their new technology bore an uncanny resemblance to some of the very early, highly experimental concepts I had explored for Albatross. Concepts I had documented in detailed private logs, logs stored on my workstation, concepts I had eventually discarded as unviable for our primary path, but fascinating nonetheless. Concepts Julian would have had access to when he fixed my computer. Could it be? Was Julian not just content with destroying me and stealing Albatross, but also with selling off my secondary, undeveloped research to a competitor? The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking greed of it was almost too much to comprehend. But it also offered a potential lifeline. If Julian had indeed passed on my proprietary research to Innovatech, perhaps through Dr. Hayes or another intermediary, that was a tangible, traceable act of corporate espionage. Project Albatross was one thing. He could claim he salvaged it. But this was different. This was theft, pure and simple, outside the confines of Sterling and Thorne's internal politics. The challenge was proving it. Innovatech was a separate entity. Dr. Hayes had no love lost for me. But if Julian had been careless, if he'd left a digital fingerprint, a breadcrumb trail, connecting him to Inovacek's sudden breakthrough, then I might just have a way to unravel his whole carefully constructed empire of lies. The despair that had clung to me like a shroud began to recede, replaced by a sliver of hope, as sharp and dangerous as a shard of glass. The hunt was on. Hope, I discovered, is a powerful stimulant. That faint, almost desperate thread connecting Julian to Innovatech Dynamics became my lifeline. For weeks, I lived and breathed their public disclosures, their patent filings, their carefully worded press releases about Dr. Evelyn Hayes' groundbreaking work. And the more I dug, the more the pieces began to align with a chilling, undeniable clarity. Innovatech wasn't just treading similar ground to my discarded Albatross subprojects. They were practically carbon copying entire theoretical frameworks, specific complex algorithms that I had developed and, crucially, never published. These were ideas born in the sanctity of my private research logs, the ones Julian had so helpfully backed up from my workstation before its convenient demise. The challenge, as always, was concrete proof. Knowing something intuitively and proving it to a skeptical world, especially when your reputation is already in tatters, are two vastly different mountains to climb. I couldn't just accuse a rising star like Hayes and a newly funded company like Innovatech of intellectual property theft based on my gut feeling. They'd laugh me out of the room, or worse, bury me under a mountain of legal fees. I needed a bridge, a direct link from my stolen research to Innovatech, and ideally, one that incriminated Julian directly. My first attempts were clumsy. I tried reaching out to Dr. Hayes through a carefully anonymized email, posing as an independent researcher intrigued by her work and hinting at some striking parallels with obscure, unpublished research. I hoped to elicit a response, perhaps a defensive one that might reveal something. Silence. Either my email never reached her or she was too savvy to take the bait. Then I considered Sterling and Thorne. Was there anyone left there who might even inadvertently help? Most of my old team were either too scared, too loyal to their new boss, or had simply moved on. But there was one person, Sarah Evans, a junior engineer, bright, meticulous, and someone I'd personally mentored during her internship. She was quiet, almost painfully shy, but possessed a fierce intelligence and a strong moral compass. I remembered her being visibly uncomfortable during my public excoriation, a fleeting look of doubt in her eyes. It was a long shot, but she was my only potential inside track. Reaching out to Sarah was like walking a tightrope. I couldn't reveal my suspicions outright. If I was wrong, or if she felt compromised, it could backfire spectacularly. I sent her a simple, friendly email asking how she was, how things were in the department, making no mention of my dismissal or Julian. To my surprise, she responded. Her tone was cautious, but warm. We exchanged a few anodyne emails before I gently steered the conversation towards the current state of Project Albatross. Julian is pushing the team incredibly hard, she wrote, her words tinged with an unspoken weariness. He's introduced new theoretical models, very advanced. Some of them are brilliant, actually, but also incredibly complex. We're struggling to integrate them smoothly with the existing architecture. My pulse quickened. New theoretical models? I typed back. Anything resembling the old phase gamma concepts I was exploring a while back, the multi-cell energy recycling pathways? These were some of the very specific, advanced ideas I'd seen echoed in Innovatech's filings. Her reply came faster this time. Arthur, it's uncanny. Some of his new directives feel like they were lifted directly from your old phase gamma private archive. I remember seeing some of your initial schematics for it, the ones you said were too ambitious for now. Julian claims he developed these independently, a eureka moment, but the specificity, it's a lot. Bingo, this was more than a hunch. Julian wasn't just selling my ideas. He was trying to launder them back into Sterling and Thorne as his own genius, likely to secure an even bigger bonus or a more powerful position. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it. He was counting on no one remembering my old, shelved work or perhaps believing I was too broken to ever challenge him. Sarah became my reluctant, cautious eyes and ears inside Sterling and Thorne. She was terrified of Julian, of losing her job, but her conscience and perhaps a lingering loyalty to me won out. She couldn't access high-level restricted files, but she could observe. She reported that Julian often worked late alone, frequently accessing the archive server sections where my older, more experimental research, including phase gamma, was stored. He'd download files, then delete the access logs, or try to. But Sarah, a quiet whiz with system forensics, noticed the digital breadcrumbs, the faint traces of his activity that he wasn't skilled enough to completely erase. She even managed, at great personal risk, to subtly flag a few of those specific archive files as pending routine integrity check, a low-level system process that would create a secondary, off-site backup copy on a little-used disaster recovery server Julian wouldn't think to monitor. It wasn't much, but it was something. Now I had two ends of the conspiracy. Innovatech publicly parading my stolen ideas as their own, and Julian secretly re-injecting those same ideas into Project Albatross, claiming them as his personal breakthroughs. The trap began to form in my mind. Julian was planning a major presentation in 6 weeks, an update to the board and key investors on the revitalized Project Albatross, showcasing his innovative new direction. This would be his coronation. It would also be his undoing. Using Sarah's discreetly obtained information about which specific phase gamma modules Julian was focusing on, I began to work in parallel. I knew that research better than anyone. I knew its strengths, its potential failure points, and most importantly, I knew the next logical steps in its development. Steps Julian, for all his cunning, likely hadn't fully grasped yet because he hadn't done the foundational work. I spent those 6 weeks in a frenzy of activity, refining my original phase gamma concepts, pushing them further, and documenting every step with meticulous, time-stamped, and digitally notarized precision. I was essentially completing the research he was in the process of stealing and presenting as his own. Then came the riskiest part of my plan. 2 weeks before Julian's presentation, I compiled a highly detailed, anonymous dossier. It contained excerpts of my original phase gamma notes, side-by-side comparisons with Innovatech's public patent filings, highlighting the irrefutable overlaps, and, crucially, pointed questions about the uncanny resemblance and the timeline of Dr. Hayes' involvement with Sterling and Thorne. I didn't mention Julian by name in connection with Innovatech. Instead, I framed it as a potential leak from Sterling and Thorne to Innovatech, urging an internal investigation to protect ST's intellectual property. I sent this dossier not to the board, who were already biased, but to 3 carefully selected, influential financial journalists known for their investigative work into corporate malpractice, and to a mid-level, ambitious compliance officer at Sterling and Thorne, whom I knew to be a stickler for rules and procedure. The idea was to light a fire under Innovatech and to sow seeds of doubt within Sterling and Thorne before Julian's presentation. If Innovatech felt their proprietary tech was about to be exposed as stolen, they might make a panicked move. If ST's compliance department started sniffing around about a potential IP leak benefiting an external company, it would create internal pressure Julian wouldn't anticipate. The journalists started asking quiet questions. Innovatech, predictably, issued a vehement denial of any wrongdoing, but their stock took a small, nervous dip. The compliance officer at Sterling and Thorne, as I'd hoped, initiated a low-key internal audit regarding IP security, focusing on recent access to archived R&D material. Julian, I imagined, was feeling the heat, but likely believed he could manage it, confident his tracks were covered. He didn't know the real storm was still gathering. The day of Julian's presentation arrived. I wasn't there, of course, I was a pariah, but Sarah was. And she had a small encrypted flash drive I'd given her. It contained my completed phase gamma research, the advanced stages, the solutions to problems Julian was likely still grappling with, the very breakthroughs he was probably about to claim as his own. It also contained a meticulously documented trail of my original work, time-stamped years prior, and a summary of the innovatic connection. Julian began his presentation. According to Sarah's live texts, he was smooth, convincing. He unveiled the new Albatross, built upon his revolutionary breakthroughs. He spoke of overcoming the previous design limitations, my supposed limitations, with his own ingenuity. He was laying it on thick, basking in the glow of stolen brilliance. Then, at the prearranged moment, as Julian paused for dramatic effect before revealing his projected performance figures, Mr. Sterling's executive assistant discreetly handed him a tablet. On it was an urgent message from the compliance officer, summarizing the findings of the IP audit, including records of Julian's extensive unauthorized access to my archived phase gamma files. Simultaneously, one of the journalists I'd tipped off published an explosive online article, Innovatic's Miracle Battery, Genius or Grand Larceny. Questions raised about links to Sterling and Thorne's shelved research. The article included anonymized excerpts from my dossier. The mood in the room, Sarah texted, shifted instantly. Julian, sensing the change, faltered. Mr. Sterling looked up from the tablet, his face like thunder. "Julian," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This report from compliance, and this breaking news, they suggest the core of your new Albatross design bears an uncanny resemblance to Arthur Jenkins' archive phase gamma project. Files you repeatedly accessed without authorization. Files that also seem to be the foundation of Innovatech's new battery. Perhaps you can explain this remarkable coincidence?" Julian turned ghost white. He stammered, denied, but the carefully constructed facade was cracking. And that's when Sarah, brave, terrified Sarah, chose her moment. As per our plan, she accidentally dropped her pen near the main presentation console. As she bent to retrieve it, she discreetly inserted the flash drive. A new file directory, clearly labeled Arthur Jenkins, Original Phase Gamma Project Complete, and supporting evidence, popped up on the main presentation screen behind a stunned Julian, visible to everyone in the room. The silence that followed, Sarah said, was deafening. Then, chaos. Julian's smug confidence evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. The meticulously laid trap had sprung. The mood in the room, Sarah texted, shifted instantly. Julian, sensing the change, faltered. Mr. Sterling looked up from the tablet, his face like thunder. "Julian," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "This report from compliance, and this breaking news, they suggest the core of your new Albatross design bears an uncanny resemblance to Arthur Jenkins' archive phase gamma project. Files you repeatedly accessed without authorization. Files that also seem to be the foundation of Innovatech's new battery. Perhaps you can explain this remarkable coincidence?" Julian turned ghost white. He stammered, denied, but the carefully constructed facade was cracking. And that's when Sarah, brave, terrified Sarah, chose her moment. As per our plan, she accidentally dropped her pen near the main presentation console. As she bent to retrieve it, she discreetly inserted the flash drive. A new file directory, clearly labeled Arthur Jenkins, Original Phase Gamma Project Complete, and supporting evidence, popped up on the main presentation screen behind a stunned Julian, visible to everyone in the room. The silence that followed, Sarah said, was deafening. Then, chaos. Julian's smug confidence evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. The meticulously laid trap had sprung. The silence in that boardroom, as Julian Vance's carefully constructed world shattered around him, was indeed profound. It was the sound of a lie dying. The pop-up directory on the main screen, Arthur Jenkins' Original Phase Gamma Project Complete, and supporting evidence hung there like a digital death warrant. Julian didn't even attempt a defense beyond a few incoherent stutters. The evidence was too blatant, too comprehensive. His meticulously planned coronation had transformed into a very public execution. The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as it should be. Julian was immediately suspended pending a full internal and external investigation, but it was a mere formality. Within days, Sterling and Thorne terminated his employment for gross misconduct, intellectual property theft, and corporate fraud. The company, now scrambling to control the narrative and mitigate the damage, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against him. News of his disgrace ripped through the industry. The wunderkind who had risen so meteorically was now a pariah, his name synonymous with deceit. Last I heard, he was drowning in legal fees. His career not just over, but annihilated. Innovatech Dynamics and Dr. Evelyn Hayes didn't escape the inferno. The journalists, armed with the initial dossier and now the explosive revelations from Sterling and Thorne's meeting, had a field day. Faced with irrefutable evidence of stolen IP, my meticulously documented original research versus their breakthrough, Innovatech's investors panicked. Their funding evaporated. Sterling and Thorne's legal team, eager to show they were aggressively protecting their Red My assets, slapped Innovatech with a cease and desist order, followed by another hefty lawsuit. Dr. Hayes vanished from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. The revolutionary battery they'd touted quietly disappeared from their promotional materials. Their little venture, built on a foundation of theft, crumbled. For me, the journey back was more complex. The first official communication from Sterling and Thorne came a week after Julian's downfall. It was a stiffly worded letter from their legal department, acknowledging newly discovered information and rescinding my termination. It was followed by a personal call from Mr. Sterling. He sounded chastened, humbled even. He apologized profusely and, I believe, sincerely for his misjudgment, for the company's failure to protect me, for the public humiliation I had endured. "Arthur," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "we were fools, blinded by ambition perhaps, and too quick to believe the worst. What Julian Vance did to you, to this company, is unforgivable. We want to make this right." They offered me my old job back, head of R&D, with a significant raise and a public statement fully exonerating me and celebrating my unwavering integrity and foundational contributions to Project Albatross. They even offered to publicly credit me with the advanced phase gamma breakthroughs that Julian had tried to steal. It was everything I had fought for, the vindication I had craved during those long, dark months of isolation and despair. My name was cleared, my honor restored, and yet I hesitated. Could I truly go back, walk those same halls, sit in that same office, knowing what I knew? The trust, once shattered so completely, felt impossible to fully piece back together. The faces of colleagues who had stood by and watched my downfall, even if out of fear, were etched in my memory. Sterling and Thorne was no longer the home I remembered. It was a place scarred by betrayal. In the end, I declined the offer to return as head of R&D. Instead, we negotiated a different arrangement. I agreed to license my completed phase gamma research to Sterling and Thorne on very favorable terms for myself, of course. I also agreed to act as an external senior consultant for a limited time to guide the new Albatross team, a team that I insisted include a promoted and rightfully recognized Sarah Evans as the lead engineer in implementing the technology correctly. This allowed me to ensure my work was finally realized, to see Project Albatross through, but on my own terms, maintaining my independence. The settlement from Sterling and Thorne, compensating me for wrongful termination, the damages to my reputation, was substantial. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about acknowledgement. It was about the price of truth.